Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. My blood turned to ice the moment Carter Vale spread the glossy aerial photographs across the polished oak conference table and said, loud enough for the clerks outside the glass wall to hear, "She's blackmailing us." The fluorescent lighting in the county planning office was cruel in that particular way government lighting always is. It flattened skin, sharpened every crease in every face, turned the steel window frames and vinyl tile floor into something cold and surgical. Carter stood at the head of the table in a charcoal suit that still held the sharp fold lines from same-day pressing. Daniel Thorne was to his left, one hand gripping the back of a black leather chair so hard his knuckles had gone pale. Richard Thorne, my former father-in-law, planted both hands on the silver cap of his cane and watched me with the serene satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already arranged the ending. Commissioner Alan Pike leaned against the blinds with his thumbs tucked into his belt, shoulders loose, eyes watchful. Near the door, Deputy Coulson shifted once and settled, boots square on the tile. Carter tapped one manicured finger against the first photograph. My dock. My shoreline. My little cedar house at Blackwater Cove, crouched under bare branches and late afternoon cloud, looking exactly as fragile and tired as they'd always insisted it was. She filed a fraudulent access objection, he snapped. Then demanded a private cash payment to remove it. That's extortion. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. Daniel didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at the table, at the pictures, at anything except my face. We tried to be reasonable, he said, voice clipped, rehearsed. But Elena's been unstable since the judgment. There was. Not just greedy. Not just desperate. Unstable. He wanted the room to hold that word for him. He wanted it to do the work. Richard gave a small, disappointed shake of his head, as if I were a waitress who'd dropped a plate. You should have taken the offer, he said. Now you've made this uglier than it needed to be. My name is Elena Ward. I'm 38. And this is the story of how I let the men who took everything from me show me exactly where they were weak, then used the only thing they called worthless to bring their whole empire down. 6 months earlier, I had walked out of family division court with a cardboard file box, a judgment order, and the kind of silence that follows public ruin. I had lost my equity in Thorne Urban Development. I had lost the condo on East Halstead with the floor-to-ceiling glass and the imported stone kitchen Daniel used to point out to guests as if he'd carved it himself. I had lost the right to use my married name in any business context. I had lost the civil claim they folded into the divorce, the one that branded me as the executive responsible for unauthorized transfers from a company account I had once managed. I had not technically lost my freedom. They left me that, the way some people leave a tip after insulting you. And then, with a softness so deliberate it still makes me cold to remember it, Daniel's attorney had slid the final property schedule across the table and said, "Of course Ms. Ward will retain the Blackwater Cove parcel. Given its condition and tax burden, we believe that's more than fair." I still remember the small smile on Richard's face when the judge approved it. The Blackwater Cove house had belonged to my mother. It sat on 2.5 acres on the north side of Lake Weller, where the road narrowed to cracked asphalt and then gravel, where cattails crowded the edges in summer and the water went black-blue under winter cloud. The roof needed work. The septic system had failed inspection 3 years earlier. One section of the dock had sunk on the left side, making every step there feel uncertain. The cedar siding was silvered and split in places. The fieldstone chimney leaned just enough to worry an honest contractor. By every visible measure it was a burden. By every measure that mattered, it was the only thing they were afraid I might understand. At the time, all I knew was that Daniel had fought strangely hard to make sure I kept it. Not sold it. Not divided it. Kept it. That stuck with me. Not because I thought he was being kind. Daniel had never mistaken kindness for strategy. But because men like Daniel and Richard only ever insist on 2 things: keeping what matters and assigning you what they believe will finish you. So when Carter Vale, one of the most aggressive waterfront developers in 3 counties, walked into a county office and accused me of extortion over a house everyone had called a rotting liability, I understood exactly what I was looking at. Greed leaves fingerprints. Carter slid a stapled packet toward Deputy Coulson. We've got emails. We've got her objection filing. We've got an offer demand. I didn't touch the packet. Alan Pike straightened from the blinds and gave me a public servant's expression, all concern arranged over calculation. Ms. Ward, if you've interfered with a county-approved shoreline access corridor, that's a very serious matter. County-approved, I repeated. Emergency access designation, he said. Signed last week. Daniel finally looked at me then. His eyes were bloodshot around the edges, but his tie was perfect, navy silk centered precisely. He always tightened when he was afraid, every inch of him drawing inward while he tried to act larger. You don't have the money for this fight, Elena, he said quietly. Take the buyout. Sign the waiver. Stop making scenes. I let my gaze move over each of them one by one. Carter, too smooth, too fast, the tendon in his jaw jumping every time he thought someone else might speak out of turn. Alan Pike, pretending neutrality while his wedding ring clicked against the blind's cord in tiny, nervous beats. Daniel, shoulders squared too rigidly, performing calm instead of feeling it. V. Richard, still as polished granite, the corners of his mouth barely lifted. Behind them, 2 junior planning clerks had paused near the copier. One held a stack of manila folders against her chest. The other kept pretending to sort permits while listening to every word. Humiliation always draws an audience. It gathers like vultures. I filed an objection, I said evenly, because unknown contractors came onto my land at 6:12 in the morning and removed 2 survey stakes. Carter laughed once. Hard. Your land. Elena, that shack is sitting inside a public utility path. Richard's cane tip clicked on the tile. Don't embarrass yourself further. I turned to Deputy Coulson. Did they give you the original access order, Deputy, or just the copy Mr. Vale printed this morning? I got a flicker. Tiny. Boo. Alan Pike's hand left the blind's cord. Carter's mouth tightened. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, pulling out my phone and placing it face up on the table, that if we're going to discuss fraud, I'd like to start with the signatures. For the first time since I'd walked into that room, nobody spoke. The silence that followed was absolute. I let it settle over the table, over the photos, over Daniel's still hand and Richard's cane and the fluorescent hum overhead. Then I sat down. Not heavily. Not dramatically. Just calmly. I pulled the nearest chair back, folded my coat over its vinyl seat, and sat as if I'd arrived early for a meeting I intended to run. Carter blinked. You don't get to control this. I looked at him. Actually, I said, I think you'll find I do. The first lesson I learned after losing everything in court was that panic is expensive. Panic makes you explain too much. It makes you show your hands before the other side has committed to the lie. It makes you reach for comfort instead of structure. I couldn't afford any of that. Not after the judgment. Not after the headlines that called me former executive Elena Ward, and repeated Thorne Urban Development statement that I had acted outside authorized financial controls. Not after women I'd once chaired fundraisers with started speaking to me in the soft, careful voices people use around fresh grief or public scandal. So I went to Blackwater Cove with my box of papers and my winter coat and 2 suitcases, and I started doing what I had always done best. I paid attention. The first 3 nights, I slept in the room at the back of the house because it was the only one where the wind didn't slip under the window frame and whistle through the curtain rods. The walls were knotty pine, dry and faintly resinous. The floorboards creaked in a pattern I remembered from childhood. At dawn, the lake light came in gray through old glass and laid itself across the braided rug at the foot of the bed. It wasn't much. It was enough. On the 4th morning, I stood in the kitchen under the yellow cone of a pendant lamp and reread the property schedule from my divorce judgment while coffee steamed from a chipped white mug. Daniel had insisted on specific language. Parcel retained by Elena Ward in sole name. No compensating adjustment required due to structural depreciation, environmental burden and reduced access value. Reduced access value. That phrase sat wrong in my mouth. No one had said access value at trial. The appraisers had talked about deferred maintenance, shoreline restrictions and seasonal desirability. They had not talked about access. So I drove into town, requested the valuation packet and learned 2 things in under an hour. First, the county appraiser who testified about Blackwater Cove had used a shoreline access map that was 18 months out of date. Second, someone had recently pulled the file for the neighboring peninsula parcels, including 3 shell company lots that had all been purchased within 90 days by entities tied to a holding company called North Channel Land Group. That name meant nothing to anyone in the records office. It meant something to me because Daniel had once spent 3 straight weekends on confidential land assembly work with a consultant from Chicago and come home smelling like old whiskey and expensive hotel soap. The next few days I worked quietly. I called in favors I had never wanted to use. A title examiner named Joyce Bell who owed me for helping her niece get an internship pulled archived easement books. A former paralegal from one of our old outside firms checked state entity filings. A friend from my pre-Thorn life, Maya Chin, who now did forensic data recovery for litigation teams, helped me restore a backup from an external drive Daniel thought he'd wiped before he moved out. The thing about arrogant men is that they hide information in plain sight because they cannot imagine anyone looking closely enough. By the end of the week, I had the shape of it. North Channel Land Group wasn't buying lakefront lots for charming cabin renovations. It was assembling every parcel around the North Cove because Carter Vale wanted to build a private marina and luxury residence project called Weller North. The project had one problem. The protected shoreline restrictions on that side of the lake made new road access almost impossible. Utility trenching was restricted. Fire access requirements were strict. And the only pre-existing grandfathered service lane that touched deep enough water for the marina plan ran through a narrow slice of land attached to Blackwater Cove. My worthless little lake house was the choke point. The old cedar house, the cracked dock, the failed septic. None of that mattered. What mattered was the land beneath it and the recorded easement tied to it in a survey from 1987, when my mother and her brother had settled an access dispute with a neighboring landowner. That document had been buried in a mislabeled archive volume, and if you didn't know to look for the old plat reference, you'd miss it. Daniel hadn't missed it. Richard hadn't missed it either. At some point before trial, they had figured out that Blackwater Cove was the one parcel Carter couldn't go around, couldn't pressure through zoning, couldn't replace with money unless I agreed. So they did what men like them always do when they want leverage. They destroyed my reputation first, isolated me, made me look broke and erratic, and assumed the pressure of survival would do the rest. They thought once I was beaten badly enough I'd sell. What they never understood was that humiliation doesn't erase pattern recognition. Sometimes it sharpens it. Please subscribe to my channel. I didn't announce what I'd found. I didn't file anything dramatic. I patched the back steps. I got the electricity stabilized. I paid the overdue tax installment using money Maya loaned me without a single ounce of pity in her face. I installed trail cameras in cedar boxes disguised as birdhouses along the drive, the shoreline, and the boathouse. I replaced the rusted lock on the file cabinet in the upstairs closet where my mother had kept insurance papers and recipes and, as it turned out, every deed-related document she had ever refused to throw away. Then I waited. Men who believe your options are gone become careless. They sent the first offer through a local broker. Quick close. Insultingly low. The second came from a different LLC with the same mailing address as the first. The third arrived on cream paper from Carter Vale's office and included a line about resolving any future permitting inconveniences. That was when I knew they were moving from opportunism to urgency. After that, Daniel began texting. Not apologies. Never those. Take the deal. You're dragging this out for no reason. Richard's trying to help you save face. That last one almost made me laugh. Then, 3 Tuesdays before the county office ambush, my trail camera caught Carter's survey crew on my shoreline before sunrise. One man yanked up 2 orange boundary stakes and tossed them into the bed of a truck. Another stood at the edge of the old service lane holding a tablet while Carter himself, in a camel overcoat and gloves, pointed toward the water and said very clearly, "Once she's boxed in, she'll have to sign." I watched the footage 3 times at my kitchen table while sleet tapped the windows like a metronome. I didn't call the police. I called Simone Kessler. Simone had once been opposite me in a financing dispute and had the unnerving gift of making silence feel strategic. She ran Kessler and Rowan, a litigation firm downtown with walnut-paneled conference rooms and a reputation for taking cases no one filed unless they planned to finish them. She listened to me without interruption, asked for copies, then said, "Do not contact them. Do not warn them. And Elena, from this moment on, let them overcommit." So I did. I filed a formal objection to the emergency access designation Alan Pike had quietly signed. Then I sent Carter Vale a 1-line email. "Please direct all future communications through counsel." He couldn't stand that. Men like Carter need the theater of access. They need the illusion that you are still available to be bullied personally. Going through council turns them ordinary. It forces them into procedure. It makes them wait in line with everyone else. 2 days later, his assistant called and said there had been a misunderstanding, and perhaps we could meet informally at the county planning office to clear the air. Which was how I ended up under fluorescent lights with 4 men trying to bury me in front of witnesses. Carter reached for the packet on the table. These signatures were validated. No, I said. A photocopy of a signature was appended to an unsigned PDF and circulated as validation. Alan Pike straightened. That's a serious allegation. It is. Richard's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. I unlocked my phone and turned it around. Deputy Coulson, this is the county metadata report for the access order Mr. Pike says was signed last week. It shows the signature block was inserted at 7:14 a.m. this morning from a private office printer on the second floor of this building. Alan's face lost color so quickly it looked drained. Carter made a sound under his breath. Daniel turned toward Pike so fast the chair legs scraped tile. I don't know anything about that, Pike said. Of course you do, I replied. Because your assistant, Marlene Fitch, forwarded the draft to Carter Vale's acquisitions director yesterday at 5:42 p.m. I have that email too. Carter recovered first. He leaned forward, palms flat on the oak. Even if that order gets challenged, it changes nothing. You filed an objection in bad faith to extract money. I scrolled once and opened the trail camera clip. The room filled with the blue-gray image of his survey team at my shoreline, time-stamped, crisp, undeniable. The men outside the door shifted for a better look. Carter's own coat flashed in frame as he pointed at my service lane. I filed an objection, I said, after your people trespassed, removed marked boundaries and discussed forcing a sale. Daniel went very still. Carter tried a laugh, but it snagged in his throat. This proves nothing. It proves 3 things, I said calmly. First, you knew my access rights mattered before you filed your emergency designation. Second, you entered my property without permission. Third, you lied in your sworn statement when you called the parcel abandoned. I tapped again. This time I brought up the occupancy permit I'd filed the week before, along with photographs of repairs, utility bills, and the preservation consultant's letter confirming Blackwater Cove qualified for review as a historic lake property. Not enough to make it a museum. More than enough to complicate demolition, forced access, or any attempt to describe it as derelict. Richard's fingers tightened around his cane. You manipulative little. And third, I said, cutting across him with the same tone I'd once used in board meetings, North Channel Land Group is not an independent buyer. It's connected through Harbor Shelf Holdings to Vale Development Partners, which acquired the Fenwick, Lorne and Taze parcels around the North Cove over the last 92 days. I let that sit. Carter's face had gone shiny at the temples. Daniel spoke too quickly. Those are unrelated investments. Then why, I asked, did you send your father this feasibility memo 3 months before trial? I placed a printed page on the table and nudged it forward with 2 fingers. I had highlighted the line. Critical dependency remains parcel 17 service corridor. If ward retains and resists, proceed with distress strategy before public filing. Nobody moved. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to recede. Please subscribe my channel. Richard was the first to speak, and for the first time in the years I'd known him, his voice wasn't polished. It was raw at the edges. Where did you get that? I met his gaze. Does it matter? Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That document is privileged. No, I said. It was forwarded to your personal account without counsel copied, attached to a development calendar, and later backed up to a shared drive your assistant forgot to remove from home sync. Deputy Coulson took one slow step closer to the table. Carter looked at Pike. Pike looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Richard. Watching powerful men search each other for an escape route is like watching a chandelier sway after the ceiling gives way. It doesn't happen all at once. First one crystal trembles. Then another. Then the whole structure realizes gravity exists. Carter jabbed a finger toward me. You stole data. I took a sip from the paper cup of bad county office coffee someone had left near the water dispenser. I had no idea whose it was. It was lukewarm and bitter. I drank it anyway, then set it down carefully. No, I said. I preserved evidence. Richard sank into a chair as if his knees had decided the matter for him. Daniel's voice cracked on my name. Elena, stop. Stop what? This. Before it goes too far. I held his eyes. Actually, Daniel, you were already far past that when you asked a developer to help strip value from marital property before judgment. There was the power shift. Clean. Public. Irreversible. Alan Pike muttered, I need my attorney. That would be wise, Simone said from the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. She crossed the threshold in a dark wool coat still dusted with sleet, a leather folio tucked under one arm, and that steady unreadable expression she wore like armor. Beside her was Owen Price, her investigator, carrying a banker box with color tabs rising from it in neat rows. Simone glanced at the table, the photographs, the half-folded packet in Carter's hand, and the faces around the room. Good, she said. You saved us time. Carter sputtered first. This is an informal meeting. No, Simone replied. This is now a documented pre-litigation conference involving fraudulent filings, trespass, attempted coercion and possible public corruption. So from this point forward, if anyone in this room speaks, assume it's going into a record. Nobody argued with her. Owen set the banker box on the table. The cardboard hit the oak with a soft, heavy thud. Simone opened her folio. Mr. Vale, Mr. Thorne, Commissioner Pike, Ms. Ward will not be selling Blackwater Cove. You will withdraw the emergency access designation today. You will cease all direct contact. And by 5 p.m., you will preserve every email, message, file and internal note connected to Parcel 17, North Channel Land Group, or Weller North Development Planning. Carter swallowed. Or what? Simone's eyes never left his. Or I file. I watched their faces change in sequence. Carter first, outrage trying to rise over fear and failing. Pike second, a sweat line appearing at his temple. Daniel third, his shoulders folding inward a fraction. Richard last, old enough and ruthless enough to understand exactly how much damage a cleanly timed filing could do. Simone snapped her folio shut. We will be in touch. I stood, slid my phone into my coat pocket and gathered the highlighted memo. Daniel half rose from his chair. Elena. I paused. He looked smaller standing than he had seated. Strange how quickly that can happen. What do you want? It wasn't a plea. Not yet. It was disbelief. Men like Daniel think if they ask the question calmly enough, the world will rearrange itself into something that still centers them. I buttoned my coat. I want you to keep underestimating me. Then I walked out past the clerks, past the copy machine, past the steel-framed door and into the wet gray evening. Behind me I heard Carter start shouting. Then Richard. Then Alan Pike saying very loudly, I was told the paperwork was clean. Then Daniel not shouting at all, which was somehow worse. They thought they had found a broke woman sitting alone in a decaying house by a winter lake. They had no idea they had just stepped into a case built precisely for the things men like them do when they panic. The next 10 days moved with the focused, merciless speed of a storm front. Simone filed preservation notices first, not complaints. That annoyed Carter, which was the point. A formal lawsuit invites immediate public posture. Preservation notices invite quiet terror. They tell sophisticated people exactly how much you already know without letting them see the whole map. Owen followed with subpoenas so narrow and specific they read like taunts. Metadata records for shoreline access documents, correspondence referencing Parcel 17, communications with Harbor Shelf Holdings, payment ledgers for independent valuation services retained between March 3 and June 28. That date range mattered. June 28 was 4 days before the first day of my divorce trial. I moved through those days from Blackwater Cove as if the house itself had become part command post, part witness box. In the mornings, pale winter light stretched over the lake and turned the water into beaten pewter. I worked at the old trestle table my mother had kept beneath the front window, legal pads spread beside a laptop Simone's office provided, file stacks rising in measured columns. The house smelled faintly of cedar dust, coffee, and the mineral cold that seeps in from stone foundations. At night, I sat by the fieldstone fireplace with a blanket over my knees and reread transcripts until the fire sank to orange ribs under gray ash. I thought a lot during those hours about the day I lost in court. Not because I wanted to relive it. Because I needed to understand what they thought had finished me. Daniel had testified with that careful hurt expression he used whenever he wanted to look like the only adult in the room. He said he trusted me with company accounts because I was his wife and because he believed in my judgment. He said he discovered irregular transfers too late. He said my increasing emotional volatility made confrontation difficult. Richard testified after him, silver tie, perfect posture, voice warm with disappointment. He said the company had treated me like family. He said he feared I confused personal entitlement with legal ownership. Their appraiser described Blackwater Cove as a sentimental burden, more liability than asset. Daniel's lawyer suggested I had clung to it irrationally because it was all I had left from childhood. That line had landed hard in the courtroom. The pity of it. The implication that sentiment had made me weak. That I could be managed through what I loved. They had been counting on that. What they didn't know then was that my mother taught me two important things in that very house. First, when people insist something is worthless in front of you, ask who benefits if you believe them. Second, if a thing has survived weather, neglect, and envy, it's probably stronger than it looks. On the 7th day, Ava Lang asked to meet me. The text came from an unknown number just after sunset. I know what Daniel did. I know what Carter plans to pin on me if this breaks. If you want the rest, meet me tomorrow. Noon. Harbolite Cafe. I showed Simone first. Her response was immediate. Public place. Owen nearby. Let her talk before you decide what she is. I knew who Ava was long before I met her. She was the architect Daniel had started working late with during the last year of our marriage. 31. Beautiful in the way magazine profiles call effortless, which usually means expensive hair and good bone structure and a career flattering enough to make men feel modern while they behave like men from a century ago. I had seen her once across a hotel ballroom at a development gala. Daniel's hand at the small of her back. His body angled toward her in that proprietary way men mistake for intimacy. By then our marriage was already a carcass everyone polite pretended not to smell. So I went. Harbolite Cafe sat on the south side of town near the marina supply shops. All brass fixtures, rain-streaked windows and dark green tile behind the counter. Noon light came in thin and colorless. The tabletops were veined marble. Cups rang softly on saucers. Ava was already there in a camel coat, both hands wrapped around a coffee she hadn't touched. Up close she looked less effortless and more exhausted. Concealer can only do so much against 3 nights without sleep. When she saw me she stood too fast and bumped the table. The spoon on her saucer rattled. I didn't know if you'd come. I almost didn't. She nodded once, accepting that. Fair. I sat across from her. You have 5 minutes. Ava looked down at her coffee then back up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady. Daniel told me the house was an obstacle. He said you were using it to punish him. I said nothing. He said you'd hidden money in the company and that if the parcel issue turned ugly, you'd probably accuse everyone of conspiracy. She gave a short humorless laugh. Which now feels unwise in retrospect. Why are you here? Because she had decided not to cry, every word seemed to cost her more. Because 3 nights ago Carter told Daniel and Richard that if the county emails came out, they'd say I backdated the environmental revisions. That I handled the file chain. They were going to put it on me. I leaned back. She reached into her bag and slid a small silver drive across the marble. I did handle the file chain. Which means I also saw everything. The draft wetlands report. The valuation memo revisions. Carter's instructions. Daniel's messages. Richard's note about getting the house assigned to you because, quote, she'd be too cornered to hold it for long. The cafe noise thinned around us. Why not go to your own lawyer? I did, she said quietly. He told me to cooperate early if I didn't want to be the youngest person in the room with criminal exposure. She finally touched the coffee cup then let go of it again. And because whatever I was to Daniel, I wasn't stupid enough to miss what he did to you. I looked at the drive. Ava's mouth tightened. He told me you were cold. Vindictive. That everything with you was a contest. Do you know what he said the night your judgment came through? I didn't answer. He said, now she'll finally understand what it costs to cross my family. Something in me went very quiet then. Not broken. Not stunned. Quiet in the way ice goes quiet before it splits. Ava swallowed. I'm not here to be forgiven. I just refuse to be disposable. That, at least I understood. I slid the drive into my coat pocket. Then don't be. She let out a breath, not relief exactly, but the first honest breath she'd taken since I sat down. As I stood, she said, Elena. I turned. I really did believe the house was worthless. I held her gaze for a moment. That was the first mistake all of you made. The formal confrontation happened 11 days after the county office ambush, on the 22nd floor of Kessler and Rowan. The reception area smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and expensive paper. The floors were dark herringbone wood, waxed to a low satin glow. Floor-to-ceiling windows threw a white winter brightness across brass lamp stems and framed abstracts in black lacquer. When Owen led me into conference room B, the table was a long slab of walnut polished so finely it caught distorted reflections of everyone seated around it. Authority has a texture. It's in the weight of the chairs, the thickness of the door, the fact that water arrives in real glasses instead of plastic cups. I wore charcoal wool and a cream silk blouse. Nothing flashy. Nothing apologetic. Simone once told me the right clothes in the right room are not vanity. They're a refusal to let anyone narrate your condition before you speak. Daniel was already there with his attorney Martin Sloan, a family law operator who had built a career on expensive civility. Daniel's suit hung looser than it had 2 weeks earlier. He kept adjusting his cuff as if his wrist bothered him. Richard sat beside him, shoulders upright by force of habit, a navy cashmere overcoat folded across the back of his chair. Carter Vale was at the far end with 2 corporate lawyers and the kind of brittle expression men wear when they have not slept but still expect obedience. Alan Pike arrived 3 minutes late, tie crooked, legal pad in hand, accompanied by a municipal defense attorney who looked furious to be there. Nobody met my eyes first. That was new. Simone entered last, carrying a slim binder and a remote. Owen followed with 3 archive boxes and a rolling evidence cart. He lined up the boxes against the wall with the kind of orderly precision that unnerves guilty people before a single document appears. Let's begin, Simone said. No grandstanding. No throat clearing. Just that. She dimmed the lights over the presentation screen until the room shifted into cooler contrast. The windows bright behind us, the walnut table dark and grave between both sides. Then the first slide appeared. Timeline. Parcel 17/Blackwater Cove/Weller North. The dates began 14 months earlier. March 4th. Richard Thorne meets Carter Vale at the Whitmore Club. Internal calendar invite recovered from assistant account. March 11th. Harbor Shelf Holdings Incorporated. April 2nd. Preliminary Weller North feasibility memo references dependency on pre-existing service lane crossing parcel 17. April 18th. Daniel Thorne requests archived valuation data on Blackwater Cove using personal email. May 7th. Revised appraisal notes change access classification from strategically favorable to reduced access value. June 9th. Alan Pike receives draft emergency shoreline language from Vale Development Council. June 28th. Daniel Thorne forwards feasibility memo to Richard Thorne with note. If we can get it assigned to her in final split, pressure window opens after judgment. July 2nd. Divorce judgment entered. Parcel assigned to Elena Ward. The room stayed silent except for the low mechanical whisper of the heating system. Simone clicked again. July 15th to October 1st. Shell entities acquire surrounding parcels. October 12th. Survey crews trespass at Blackwater Cove. October 14th. Elena Ward files objection. October 17th. Fraudulent access order prepared. October 18th. County office confrontation. The final slide simply said premeditation. Martin Sloan lifted a hand. A timeline is not proof of wrongdoing. No, Simone said. That's what the exhibits are for. Owen placed binders in front of each attorney. Thick, tabbed, color-coded. The kind of binders that make experienced counsel sit a little straighter because they understand the hours behind them. Simone moved methodically one piece at a time. The revised appraisal draft, showing track changes from an associate appraiser who originally marked Blackwater Cove's access rights as uniquely favorable for future development potential. The final version submitted in court omitted that section entirely. The metadata on the emergency access order, proving same-day signature insertion from Pike's office printer. The trail camera footage of the survey crew removing marked stakes. The email chain between Carter's acquisitions director and Pike's assistant coordinating language before any legitimate emergency review had occurred. Then Ava's material. That was where the room changed. Simone didn't rush it. She drew it out with professional cruelty, the kind that never raises its voice because it doesn't need to. A Slack export from Carter's internal project channel discussing distress leverage after my judgment. A voice memo Daniel sent Ava after the first buyout refusal. She's broke, isolated, and sitting in a mold trap. Keep pressure steady. A markup note from Richard on a draft public statement. No direct threats. Push concern retaxes/safety/nuisance status. And then the one that made Carter's attorney close his eyes for a full second. A revised wetlands report with Ava's credentials attached to the title block but Carter's direct instruction in the comments. If access issue stalls, expand impact zone. Need more regulatory fear around the cottage. You falsified environmental pressure to cheapen the parcel, Simone said. You manipulated marital valuation to get it assigned to Ms. Ward under disadvantage, then coordinated a post-judgment acquisition strategy using public office contacts and false nuisance narratives. Carter tried to lean back but the chair caught awkwardly against the rug edge, and for one strange undignified second he looked like a man collapsing in stages. This is a gross distortion. Is it? Simone tapped the binder. Because your own language is unusually helpful. Richard cut in, voice hard again because fear had finally found anger to hide behind. Even if you prove hostile negotiations, that doesn't overturn the judgment. I spoke for the first time since sitting down. No. The fraud does. Everyone looked at me. I folded my hands on the walnut table. You didn't just try to buy a parcel. You constructed an evidentiary environment around me. You used altered valuation, hidden development interest, and a coordinated post-judgment pressure campaign to distort both the property division and the civil narrative that stripped me of company standing. Daniel stared as if hearing my voice in that room violated some arrangement he thought still existed. Simone gave the floor back to the evidence. She called in Joyce Bell by video first, the title examiner who walked the room through the 1987 recorded service easement in precise, unsentimental terms. Book 442, page 118. Appurtenant rights attached to Parcel 17. Utility and service access restrictions benefiting connected North Cove tracts. In plain language, without Blackwater Cove, Weller North could not legally satisfy access and servicing requirements in its planned form. Then Owen presented the financial overlay. Payment records from Vale Development to Harbor Shelf Holdings. Consulting invoices to Daniel unrelated to any declared marital separation activity. A transfer to Pike's brother-in-law's landscaping company 2 days after the emergency draft language was sent. Alan Pike began sweating openly at that point, blotting his upper lip with a folded tissue until it tore. This is ridiculous, his attorney snapped. My client is not responsible for every contractor payment in the county. Good, Simone said. Because the Attorney General's office will appreciate knowing exactly which ones he is responsible for. That landed hard. Martin Sloan cleared his throat. Let's not make threats. Simone's expression didn't change. Counsel, a threat is what your client spent 6 months doing. This is called notice. Then came the unexpected ally. Simone looked toward the side door. Owen opened it. Ava Lang stepped in wearing black trousers, a slate coat, and the expression of someone who had been afraid for so long that fear had finally burned itself into resolve. Daniel's face emptied when he saw her. Not outrage. Not yet. First disbelief. As if an object he'd set on a shelf had just walked back into the room and started speaking. Ava took the seat near Simone, not mine, not theirs. I retained separate counsel 3 days ago, she said, voice steady. I've proffered copies of my project communications and retained the original revision history for the Weller North environmental set. Carter made a strangled sound. You signed confidentiality. Ava looked at him. You tried to assign criminal exposure to me for edits you ordered. Daniel leaned forward. Ava, you don't know what you're saying. She turned to him last. I know exactly what I'm saying. I also know you asked me to move draft files off the monitored server and communicate through personal text when this started getting messy. Richard hit the table with his palm. Not loud. Worse than loud. A flat slap of lost control on polished walnut. This is what happens when you bring children into adult business. Ava didn't flinch. No. This is what happens when you assume women will protect your reputation after you treat them as replaceable. I didn't smile. It would have been too easy. But I felt something warm and clean move through me all the same. Simone let the fracture spread. She didn't interfere. She simply advanced the next slide. Cooperation options. Immediate written retraction of all allegations concerning Elena Ward's financial misconduct. Joint stipulation to reopen and vacate the civil findings obtained through concealed material evidence. Transfer of all claims, encumbrances and access assertions affecting Blackwater Cove. Full preservation and turnover of development, appraisal and county communications. Sworn affidavits identifying responsible parties for document manipulation and pressure strategy. Settlement payment to Elena Ward for damages, fees, reputational harm and wrongful coercion. Cooperation with regulatory and criminal review. Carter laughed once too loud, almost wild. You think we're signing that? No, Simone said. I think some of you are calculating whether you'd rather sign that than explain these exhibits to a grand jury, a licensing board, your lenders, and every outlet that covered Ms. Ward's so-called misconduct. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to lean on. Then the room broke exactly the way rotten beams do, not all at once but permanently. Alan Pike's attorney spoke first. We need a caucus. Immediately. Carter snapped. If Pike kept his people under control, we wouldn't be here. My people, Pike shot back, weren't the ones falsifying wetlands pressure. Daniel turned on Carter. You told us the valuation adjustments were normal. Carter barked a laugh. You begged for the distress angle. Richard's voice cut across all of them, low and lethal. Enough. But it was already too late. Once blame enters the room, loyalty leaves through the first available door. Martin Sloan asked for a private conference with Daniel. Pike demanded his own room. Carter began whispering furiously to one lawyer while the other flipped through exhibits with a colorless face. Richard stayed seated, but the hand on his cane had started to tremble. Simone looked at me. Would you like a break? No. She nodded once. He knew why. I had spent too long outside rooms like this imagining their center. I wasn't leaving now. During the first caucus, Owen brought me tea in a porcelain cup. Real tea. Not office pod water. Steam curled up against the cool glass of the windows. Snow had started falling over downtown in soft diagonal lines, whitening rooftops, blurring the river into silver. Ava crossed the room once her counsel signaled it was acceptable. She stopped at the edge of my chair. You were right. About what? That the house wasn't what mattered. It was what it stopped. I looked out at the snow for a moment. It mattered too. Ava followed my gaze. I know that now. Her voice held no appeal in it. No request. Just recognition. That made it easier to answer honestly. My mother used to say houses remember the people who loved them well. Ava's expression softened. Then maybe it chose the right side. When the others came back in, they looked diminished. That's the word for it. Diminished. Not defeated yet. Not publicly. But smaller in their own outlines. Daniel's tie had loosened. Carter's hair, usually disciplined into glossy order, now carried the marks of repeated frustrated hands. Pike no longer leaned back like a man entitled to space. He folded inward over his legal pad. Richard remained composed because he had spent a lifetime making composure part of his rank, but the effort showed now in the set of his mouth. The second round was uglier. Carter wanted to buy his way out. Straight cash. Confidential terms. Mutual non-disparagement. Simone declined without even pretending to consider it. Richard tried to carve Daniel away from the core conspiracy by portraying him as emotional, misled, over-involved after marital strain. Daniel heard that and went white with fury. Don't do that, he said. Richard didn't look at him. I'm stating what can still be salvaged. Daniel laughed then, and the sound of it was pure damage. Salvaged. That's what I am to you. Martin Sloan murmured something about preserving privilege. Daniel ignored him. He looked across the walnut table at his father, then at Carter, then finally at me. You want truth? Fine. Carter brought the deal. Richard loved it. Pike wanted his piece. They told me if Blackwater Cove stayed in her hands after judgment, she'd be too broke to maintain it, and we'd pick it up in a tax cycle if the pressure didn't work sooner. Richard's voice was sharp as glass. Do not be stupid. Daniel laughed again, lower this time. You already decided I was expendable 5 minutes ago. He turned back to Simone. The transfers they blamed on Elena. Some were mine. Some were Richard's. They needed a single operator to attach them to. She had account authority, so it was easy. Even Carter stared at him then. I felt the words hit and pass through me with surprising calm. Not because it didn't matter. Because some truths are so long expected they arrive less like bullets than like overdue weather. Simone did not waste the moment. To be clear, she said, voice even, you are stating on the record in the presence of counsel that material allegations used against Ms. Ward in civil proceedings were knowingly false or misleading. Daniel's mouth trembled once before he locked it down. Yes. Richard surged half out of his chair. Martin, stop this. Martin didn't move. For once, the lawyer in the room knew exactly which fire was now bigger. Daniel kept going. He admitted the valuation strategy. He admitted the internal belief that the parcel would cave under pressure. He admitted sending the memo about the distress window. He stopped short of saying bribery because even in collapse, self-protection has instincts. But once one thread is pulled, the fabric tells its own story. Next time, I thought, make sure the people you build your lies around don't hate you by the end of them. It took another 3 hours to get to signatures. By then the lights outside the windows had come on across the city, constellations in office towers and apartment blocks, yellow and white against the early dark. The conference room lamps reflected softly in the walnut surface. Glasses had been emptied and refilled. Pages had been redrafted. Language had been fought over, narrowed, widened, and pinned down again. The final agreement did not fix everything. Real life never closes that cleanly. But it did exactly what I needed it to do. Daniel signed a sworn statement retracting the allegations of my unauthorized financial misconduct and acknowledging concealed development-related motives affecting the property strategy around Blackwater Cove. Richard, on behalf of Thorn Urban Development's holding entities, agreed to a financial settlement substantial enough to fund litigation correction, reputational repair, and whatever came next for me. Carter and his companies relinquished all asserted access claims and agreed to preserve and turn over development records. Alan Pike committed to immediate withdrawal of the emergency access designation pending independent review. All parties consented to disclosure necessary for regulatory inquiry. Simone insisted on initials at the bottom of every page. One by one they signed. I watched the movement of their hands more than their faces. Richard's signature was still beautiful, old-school and expensive-looking, but there was a hitch in the downstroke. Carter pressed too hard and nearly tore one sheet. Pike initialed like a man writing on a confession wall. Daniel's pen paused halfway through his surname. When it was done, the room exhaled without relief. No one had won in there the way men like them understand winning. There was no applause, no booming statement, no vindictive gloating. Just paper. Consequence. Sometimes that's more devastating. Richard pushed his chair back first and stood with visible effort. He buttoned his coat and looked at me across the table as if trying to decide what category I belonged in now. For years he had treated me with a kind of polished condescension that passes for respect in certain families. He admired discipline in women as long as it served the architecture of male power. The moment it ceased to do that, he called it ambition, coldness, ingratitude. Now he had no category left that protected him. You always were sentimental about that house, he said. I rose slowly. No, Richard. I picked up my copy of the agreement. I was strategic. He stared at me. Daniel shut his eyes for a second. Carter swore under his breath. I turned to leave, then paused with my hand on the brass lever. Without looking back, I said, you were right about one thing. Sentiment has no place in business. That's why I kept the house. Then I walked out into the corridor where the lights were warm, the carpet thick, and the city beyond the windows looked sharp enough to start over in. 6 months later, I woke to sunlight on oak floors and the smell of coffee drifting up from my own kitchen. Morning at Blackwater Cove had changed by then. The roof had been repaired. The cedar siding had been cleaned and sealed, its grain warm again instead of weather gray. The septic system had been replaced. The dock had been rebuilt in lake-worn timber with black iron fittings and low amber lights along the edge that came on at dusk. In the upstairs bedroom I had finally replaced the old rattling windows. So dawn came in clean and quiet across white curtains and the blue wool throw folded at the end of the bed. Outside, the lake moved in long bands of silver under spring sun. New reeds had come up near the shoreline. The boathouse roof, once sagging, now sat straight and dark against the water. On clear mornings, the whole cove smelled like wet stone, cedar, and thawing earth. I carried my coffee out to the back porch in a thick cream sweater and stood there barefoot for a minute, letting the cool boards press against my feet. That was one of the first pleasures I got back. Not luxury. Not status. Texture. Warm mug in hand. Sun on my face. The low wooden rail beneath my palm. Peace has a body before it has a philosophy. By then the karmic inventory was almost embarrassingly thorough. Richard Thorne resigned from the board of Thorne Urban Development 3 weeks after our agreement became public through a regulatory filing no one could keep the press from finding. Officially, he stepped aside for health reasons. Unofficially, the lenders had lost patience, the board had lost nerve, and the Whitmore Club had quietly made it known his dinner reservations were no longer as uncomplicated as they once were. In towns like ours, social exile never announces itself. It simply stops opening doors. Daniel lost his broker affiliations first, then his consulting arrangements. No one likes a man associated with document manipulation and a collapsing development scandal, especially not investors who prefer their liars discreet. The last reliable thing I heard was that he was doing contract estimating for a mid-sized builder 2 counties over under his middle name, which felt exactly proportional to the man he had always been beneath the polish. Reduced, still trying to sound important in smaller rooms. Carter Vale fared worse. Once the Weller North financing package stalled, reporters started looking at the land assembly. Once they looked at the land assembly, they found the county communications. Once they found the county communications, the story ceased being about a lake project and became about access pressure, concealed conflicts, and manipulated environmental process. His flagship office on Riverside emptied in stages. Senior staff left first. Then the lenders. Then the vendors who sensed unpaid invoices coming the way animals sense weather. Last I heard, he was fighting 3 civil actions and 1 criminal review while insisting the whole thing was an overblown misunderstanding. Alan Pike resigned before the county could demand it publicly. The ethics inquiry did the rest. Men like Pike always imagined their real punishment would be legal. Usually it's social. Being forced to sit in the same grocery store cafe with people who now know exactly what price you put on your office. Watching them not greet you. Watching them remember. Even the smaller enablers got their share. The appraiser who revised Blackwater Cove's classification had his certification suspended pending review of other files. One of Carter's acquisition managers, who liked to refer to lake residents as sentimental holdouts, was named in a deposition and suddenly discovered that swagger doesn't travel well once it's searchable. Martin Sloan, to his credit, was never sanctioned, but the shine came off. People in his circles began using phrases like, too close to client narrative, which is professional language for you should have known what you were carrying. As for the messages, they came exactly the way I knew they would. First, threats. Carter's office, through counsel, warning against public embellishment. Then bargaining. Richard's assistant asking whether a private discussion might reduce unnecessary reputational spread. Then nostalgia. Daniel at 11:43 p.m. on a Sunday sending, I miss you. The family isn't the same. That one sat on my screen under the reflected light of the porch lamp while frogs sounded from the reeds and the lake held the last of the evening blue. I archived it without answering. A week later he tried again. You know, my father forced a lot of this. Then we were good once. Then months after that, just my name. No punctuation. No performance left. Just Elena. There is a clean kind of power in refusing to reopen doors that only ever led to rooms where you were expected to shrink. What surprised me most wasn't that I ignored them. It was how easy it became. Because by then my life was full. Not in the glossy magazine sense. Not the curated version I once played beside Daniel in rooms built for appearances. Full in the way solid things are full. Friendship. Structure. 3 months after the agreement, I opened Ward Due Diligence and Advisory out of a renovated brick office over Mercer Street, with tall industrial windows, matte black shelves, and a conference table made from reclaimed walnut that made me laugh the first time I signed papers on it. We specialized in land use review, forensic property history, entitlement risk, and litigation support for people who were about to be bullied out of something they didn't yet realize they owned. Some of my clients were small investors. Some were families fighting predatory acquisitions. More than a few were women disentangling themselves from business partnerships that had quietly become extraction schemes in tailored suits. Turns out there is a market for someone who can read a title chain, a body, and a lie with equal fluency. Maya came in as my operations lead 2 days a week and claimed, with complete honesty, that the office plant stayed alive only because she threatened them professionally. Simone referred select cases when conflict rules allowed it. Joyce Bell consulted on title histories and once told a client in my conference room, "If Elena asks for a missing plat book, don't assume it doesn't matter. That's how men lose counties." And Ava Lang improbably became part of the afterlife of it all too. Not immediately. Trust isn't a light switch. But about a month after the settlement, she sent a message asking if I knew a contractor who could help her review old restoration drawings for a farmhouse she'd rented outside town. I sent her Henry Ellis, the same contractor who had rebuilt my dock and treated every board on the place as if he were speaking to the house directly. A week later, she dropped off a folio of original elevation sketches she found for Blackwater Cove in Carter's discarded project materials. "Thought these belonged with someone who'd actually care," she'd said. After that, a strange, cautious friendship began. Not because the past vanished. It didn't. But because two women can look at the wreckage left by the same kind of man and recognize that surviving him doesn't have to make enemies of them forever. One Thursday afternoon in late May, Maya leaned in the doorway of my office with Thai takeout balanced against one hip and said, "You will not believe who I just saw downtown." I looked up from a survey overlay. "If it's Daniel, I do believe it. Small city." "Worse," she said, grinning. "Carter Vale in line at the permit counter holding his own roll plans." I laughed before I could stop myself. Maya set the food down on the conference table. No assistant. No driver. No intern to glare for him. Just Carter and a cardboard tube waiting like the rest of humanity. What was he filing? She opened a container and handed me chopsticks. Temporary signage for a retail rehab. I took them. Poetic. She raised her iced tea in salute. Economical justice. Another karma update came from Ava in July while we were sitting on my restored dock with our shoes off and a bottle of sparkling water between us. Dragonflies skimmed the lake surface in quick blue flashes. The board still held the day's warmth. "Have you heard about Richard?" she asked. "I try not to make a hobby of it. You should make an exception this once." She leaned back on her hands, face tipped toward the lowering sun. "He's trying to fundraise for a historical preservation initiative." I turned to look at her. She smiled. Apparently a house by the lake taught him the importance of legacy. I laughed so hard I had to set down my glass. That was the thing none of them ever anticipated. Not the lawsuit risk. Not the document trail. Not even the exposure. They never anticipated joy after them. They imagined consequences as a continuation of conflict, a chain that would keep us all linked forever. But real recovery is less theatrical than that. It doesn't announce itself in dramatic speeches. It arrives in better sleep. In appetite returning. In work that feels clean. In friends who come over without asking whether you want to talk and simply hand you a glass, a folder, a ridiculous story from downtown, and let normal life stitch you back together. That evening in early September, the lake held the sunset like burnished copper. Ava came by just before dusk with a bakery box from North Street and 2 stemless glasses. The air was warm enough for bare arms, cool enough that the cedar rail felt smooth and faintly chilled under my fingertips. Across the cove, the tree line had begun to turn, the